You better do this right. You're going to use pecans. You better bring it. So there's a responsibility not to just have this be smushed up pecans put in water. What do you do to honor what my grandmother puts in her Thanksgiving pie?
This is Lone Startup. I'm your host, Pat Killorn, and I'm here to pull back the curtain on Austin's most inspiring entrepreneurs. Their stories, their struggles, their wins. My next guest, Laura Shenkar, is a water technology expert. She spent most of her career helping huge corporations and farmers implement new ways to use water more efficiently. She was even one of the most influential people behind California implementing drip irrigation standards. One of her consulting projects brought her out to Texas, and she realized pecan farmers weren't getting their fair share of business. And with the non-dairy milk industry dominated by oat milk and almond milk, she kept wondering, why hasn't anyone made pecan milk? It seems so obvious. Pecans are delicious. They're packed with antioxidants, fiber, and they're one of the best nuts for brain health. On top of that, unlike almonds and cashews, pecans are actually native to North America. Something that was important to Laura because she knew that growing pecans didn't require importing bees or having additional water sources to survive. Over thousands of years, pecan trees have adapted to thriving off their natural habitat. Eventually, Laura couldn't wait anymore. Somebody had to do it. Enter Pecan, a brand built on Texas pride, pecans, and Laura's mission to protect freshwater ecosystems. Her journey to launching this brand all started with a little girl obsessed with farming in, of all places, Detroit, Michigan.
The way that little girls who are growing up in Detroit, Michigan, in the suburbs, the way you see that they're going to be really interested in farming is that they have their little impatiens garden in the backyard. So I've always been interested in gardening. And my first job when I was 16 was working in the fields in Fresno, planting and then harvesting the first red seedless grapes. So this was early 80s. So that was the beginning.
Oh, interesting.
And I got into peaches, and so that's always been part of my background. Now you were mentioning that you had a lot of startup background. I've only worked at startups. I've never worked in a name brand firm, and they started off as software startups. And then when I basically in the clean tech revolution, I got excited about applying something that had always been an interest to me, which was natural resources.
Mm.
And with the clean tech revolution, you saw a lot of interest in water.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent 15 years as a water technology and innovation consultant working for Walmart, for the US military, looking at where water really is valuable,
Mm-hmm.
because in most places it isn't that valuable, and looking at how we can use innovative technology to address that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, at 16, you started doing
Yeah,
hands-on gardening,
very.
farming, right?
But what it was actually yeah, real farming.
Real
Yeah.
farming. Like, was that? How did you even like decide to do that? Was that something like your parents were like, "Hey, you should check this out," or did you have friends doing it, or what even drew you to it initially? Can you remember?
It's my happiest when I'm out there, the smell of the soil, getting it dirty on your hands, having it stain your skin.
Hmm.
It is one of the most satisfying things I know of.
Yeah.
To be out in nature, to be making food, to be watching it grow.
Hmm.
Uh, and yeah, as I've grown older, I've become aware of the fact that I allowed myself to be showered in pesticides, and
Yeah.
there are a lot of elements to the early days, which I definitely understand more about today.
Yep.
But that visceral just joy
Yeah.
is behind all of this. And you see that when you talk to pecan farmers in Texas, you see that they truly believe that their pecans taste better than their neighbors,
Hmm.
that they make something that is truly superior. And it's an honor driven, it's a source of great pride
Yeah.
to produce great food.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to talk about kind of the Texas ecosystem that you're helping to contribute to with PKN and the pecan milk, and we'll get to where how that all started. You're obviously also well educated. You went to Yale and then you went to Harvard MBA school. When you went to Harvard,
business school, was there any sort of kind of initial um, vision or goal you had graduating? Was like, hey, I know I want to be involved in startups, or I want to be involved in clean tech. Did that start to kind of manifest as you went to school?
That's a yeah, it's a wonderful question. So from the yearbook from my business school class, there's a picture of a few of us literally hugging a tree. So it was not a way that I could see of making money back when I was in business school, but I was a tree hugger.
Hmm.
And, behind the dean's back, the dean at the time was from the forestry industry. Behind his back, we converted the entire school. At the time, they made Harvard Business School makes cases, and they were
Hmm.
producing huge amounts of paper, and we converted it all to recycled paper underneath the radar,
Oh wow.
and it became sort of a trademark. The way you look at business school cases today is that they have that recycled paper look.
Huh.
I've been doing tree hugger thing
Yeah.
my whole life,
Interesting.
yeah, I guess
And then
it's
business school gave you the kind of the business acumen around it, that how to find those market opportunities that could support some of those more tree hugger initiatives,
that's
right?
true, yeah, so I guess, yeah, and I guess looking at where it makes sense, that has a lot to do with the reason that we chose Texas for this thing.
Yeah, yeah. Um, okay, and so I want to jump a little bit. So, you worked at Artemis Water Strategy. Did you start that? Is that you founded that Artemis
Yeah,
Water Strategy?
right.
What did that look like when you go back to kind of you graduated from Harvard? I know you worked in Tel Aviv for a few years, kind of
Mhm.
with startups, right? Kind of helping them go to market. How did, at what point did Artemis Water Strategy become something you wanted to kind of you know pursue?
So there've been 3 pivots in my career, and the pivot from software to natural resources and water was counterintuitive, to say the least. Uh, it's very hard to make money off of water technology. I could see that it was going to become very important, and I was sure of these things. And I was able to leverage this international network, which was very important if you're going to talk about water. So,
Hmm.
Singapore, Denmark, Israel, all these places have had to be innovative around water. One of the
Hmm.
things you look at when you look at innovation is what a place doesn't have. So
Hmm.
Singapore was completely reliant on Malaysia for two-thirds of its water, and they wanted to become independent. Well, scientifically, that was impossible.
Mm,
And they said, "Well, we'll see about that." They set up massive desalination. They looked at every possible way of saving water and making new water, and they've made it happen. So you
mhm,
look at that kind of lack or challenge as a great source of innovation. So through Artemis, we were able to reach out internationally everywhere. And
mhm,
we put together an international competition for startups to highlight the most promising ones based on their
mm.
business acumen, based on the technology. And we pulled from 17 countries and had over 1,000 applicants over 5 years,
Wow.
highlighting a lot of the most important innovations in water, which you see today.
Mhm. Wow. Yeah, are any of those companies, have they become huge since back then, those startups? Or any of those kind of now blossoming big companies?
So, based on the quality of the management we saw, and the quality of the need.
Mhm.
You're not gonna argue with me that we don't need water,
Yeah.
right? You're not gonna argue with me that it's not running out.
Yep.
Uh, Based on the quality of the companies we saw, we were expecting a Google,
Mhm.
and you frankly haven't seen that.
Mm.
And so the reason for the 3rd transition away from water into pecans and pecan milk was that it was clear that scarcity, technology, even the financing to take any risk away from new technology, it wasn't enough. You needed the magic, the pull
Mhm.
of CPG to bring it all together. So you
Yeah.
have consumer-driven innovation where people at Central Market and HEB are saying, "I want this," and that's driving farmers to make changes.
Interesting. So you did all this work fighting all these uphill battles, trying to really guide people into the next generation of water preservation and technology,
Mhm.
and you kind of came back to, we need to have the demand built from consumers,
Right.
and PKN is kind of the result of feeling like this is another avenue and a way to achieve that. example?
So Gustav Speth, who is the former head of the Yale Environmental School, also the man behind the UN PPIC initial sort of climate change initiatives,
Mhm,
always talks about the fact that in any massive change that civilization has made in terms of becoming more environmentally aware, it's always come from the grassroots. So you look at the Japanese protests about air pollution as
mhm.
that landmark beginning of a worldwide shift toward focusing around spending some money and effort around controlling air pollution. So you see
Yeah.
the one of the lessons you look if you look at the long term of environmental initiatives is that it always starts at a grassroots level on a
Mhm.
very you mentioned your family and your kids. It always starts there.
Yeah.
And you look, especially with water, you look ahead more than the next 2 months, the next year.
Yeah. But I was digging back through some of your old presentations, over a decade ago, and I
Right.
mean, you were basically giving not only the playbook, but you were showing case studies that you actually executed on with these big Fortune 100 companies to show not just the environmental impact you can have, but the business ROI on some of these
Absolutely.
innovations, right? And like all signs were pointing to why would you not do this as a big corporation, right?
Right.
When you look back at those presentations and the reaction you had back then, have there been any like big updates since then? Have you seen progress being made, or was it kind of just lackluster? Like, or what's been the reaction since that time?
So, you don't have these big Google, fireworks displays, but if you look, for example, in 2007, I worked with, the California state government to recommend ways that we could save energy by saving water in California. And one of the recommendations that caught the most controversy was that we were telling almond growers that they would have to implement drip irrigation. It'll save
Mhm.
about 90% of the water. Today, 90% more of the, almonds are grown with drip irrigation. So it
Mm,
happened I would
mhm.
like a thank you note,
Yeah.
but it has happened throughout the business climate to become much more aware of water savings. It is something that is inevitable,
Yeah.
and you also look at the likes of a Walmart that spent $500 million on sustainability, and
Mhm.
they didn't do it for any other reason than sustainability has always been part of the root of their ethos, which is we
Yeah.
need to make this cost efficient and resilient so we can serve these customers in small towns.
Yep.
And so saving water and conserving water on site is second nature there.
Mhm.
And they've made it part of their business. And it does save them a lot of money. And I think more importantly, it protects them against changes.
Yeah.
So what you're seeing in Texas right now is you're having to change business models
Yeah.
abruptly because you've run out of water. So what you see if you look at Singapore or Las Vegas, or I think it might have been Las Vegas, or Israel, is that the places that are water scarce,
Mhm.
that whose destiny relies on having enough water, have
Yeah.
had to invest much more,
Yeah.
and they're much more prepared for these things. If you look at Austin, what you've seen is a lot of farms being bought out just for their water supply to supply
Mm.
municipal governments.
Mhm.
And so that switch has been happening. In Texas, you see it much more than other places.
Yeah.
Farmland investors no longer feel comfortable making investments in farmland here because they're
Mhm.
worried about water availability.
Mm.
As I said, there's this great business going of selling water rights for municipal
Oh,
water.
interesting. Gotcha.
And you do have, I guess, much more expensive rates for swimming pools,
Yeah.
right?
So that's preventing more farmers from doing, more regenerative farming practices?
It's preventing farmers from basically they're selling out their resources and getting out of farming. So
Getting not doing crops and doing just straight up water deals.
right.
Uh,
So you see pecans have plummeted in terms of their production in Texas.
mm,
And it's moved toward more water available places like Georgia.
gotcha. Okay, so let's jump into the start of PKN and livestock here. So, you mentioned kind of different three big transitions in your life. So, what was kind of the ultimate path to starting PKN? Like, what was the spur, the last straw that said, "Okay, I'm going to go this route instead and see if this
Well,
works."
you hit on it. Yeah. So I spent from 2016 looking on the shores of the San Saba River, where I had been hired to implement water technology with financing mechanisms. I was working for a large farmland investor. And around the edges of these farms where they were growing alfalfa, which makes no sense whatsoever, around the edges of the farms were pecans. And the farmers had not entered into the pecan business because it was so disadvantageous.
Mm.
And they were just growing there. I kept asking. So for the next 4 years, I asked everyone I could find, "Why aren't we making pecan milk?" It didn't make any sense. It would taste great. People got it immediately,
Mhm.
and somebody was gonna do it. It wasn't me because I wasn't qualified to do it. And it was a specific conversation in February before the pandemic
Mm.
where I was just really frustrated trying to, be a consultant to a specific company, and I just lost my patience. So it was 4 years of analysis that made a lot of sense,
Yeah.
except for the fact that I wasn't the right person, and then a second of frustration, and just that's it.
Yeah.
And I still knew I wasn't qualified, but lo and behold, 5 years later, I'm a lot more qualified.
I mean, not qualified. You had most of your career advising startups too. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
and going, go to market strategies. I think you were pretty equipped to at least to kind of know how to navigate, getting a product to market. So I wouldn't say
That's
you
true.
weren't qualified, but that's interesting. So you spent all that time with pecan farmers, and you mentioned it being disadvantageous to them. Why so? Why was the economics not there for them to do that?
It's wonderful to have pecan trees, but unless you've got somebody to shell them, they're not gonna be worth that much money.
It's a very manual process to do that, right?
Well, or it takes a lot of capital investment.
Mm,
So there are a few groups that have enough money to set up the initial shelling, and then they
mm,
grow.
mhm,
And lo and behold, if they're trying to see if they can make more money, they're going to start gaming the system. And so what you've got are situations where shellers come and say, "We're gonna at the beginning of the season, you don't know what's gonna happen. What if I give you 3/4 of what you think the market's gonna be worth? Is it a gamble you're willing to take?" And the farmers say, "I'm not sure, I don't know, but I really need the money," and so they say yes.
mm,
And lo and behold, they undercut themselves over and over again, and that becomes the style of business. You see
mhm,
this in corn, you see this in wheat, and you definitely see it in pecans. We work with a sheller called Southern Roots, which is really breaking new ground around this. They specifically, they're one of the very few places that is owned by growers. So this is a sheller owned by growers,
mhm,
providing them with full transparency on how much they make off of each pecan.
mhm,
So you can see how your harvest is going.
mhm.
And obviously, I think that they've been very popular,
Yeah.
and they're running at full capacity. And I think it's a model that's really going to change things. What we look at as we develop this is that it is an ecosystem play.
Mhm,
And if I look at the great technology innovators, they also pay attention to how you work with the ecosystem,
mhm.
competition as well as partners, and you try as much as possible to support a certain kind of practice.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that farmers are taking care of their land for the long term. And obviously, the first thing is that they need to be able to make money. So this is made out of pecans that would have been thrown away. It's upcycling pecans that are made out of pieces that are so small that they
Mm,
wouldn't be sold onward for the wonderful pecan pies and everything that you think of when you think of pecans.
right.
So this is a new stream of revenue
Mm,
that should support the transition to drip irrigation and sensors instead of pesticides. This is,
gotcha.
especially in the current cost climate, this is
Yeah.
something that's a very popular idea, but it's very risky.
Yeah, so it's a whole new incentive for these farmers. You're creating a whole new revenue
Exactly.
stream for them, and it might encourage them to do, like you're saying, more regenerative farming techniques to do it the right way for a long term kind of sustainable ecosystem. And we were talking about this before we officially started recording, but let's talk a little bit about why Texas in particular. I know pecans are native to kind of Texas and the southeast, and obviously Georgia and some other areas. But why did you want Austin to kind of be the hub for you when you were evaluating, where you could start this company?
So in 2016, NatureVest paid me to come out here and look at the
Mhm.
San Saba River and how we could save it. And that was my first touch with pecans in Texas. And, as someone who's not from Texas, it's a real discovery. I think we all know that Texans think Texas is pretty great.
Yep.
There's a certain amount of pride there, but they also really are proud of their pecans.
Mhm.
And, that was an interesting thing at the time. But as you start to look, how are you possibly gonna convince people to try something completely new with what I would consider a future-looking perspective, where we're looking at how we can support the farmers?
Mhm.
All of those pieces come together beautifully if you look at Texas.
Mhm.
This is a friend of mine jokes that it's the national tree of Texas. This is the state tree for Texas.
Yep.
And there is this pride, which I can't explain. People across economic areas, across demographics, they are so proud of their pecans.
Mhm.
Now,
Yep.
this goes back to something that's much older. Pecans have been here for millions of years, long before there were humans. So there are certain places in the United States where these truly are as old, much older than human beings
Yeah.
in terms of being indigenous. And this is a very important thing. If you look at the future in terms of climate change, you're going to need those anchors of the
Mhm.
nature and natural ecosystem to prevent being overwhelmed by invasive species,
Mhm.
insects. We talk about harsh weather.
Yep.
These pecans have been there so long that they've been through much worse
Yeah, and they know how to they know how to adapt to the climate here in Texas.
and work with the rest of the things in the ecosystem, the
Yeah.
flora and fauna, the fungi, so that they work as a collaborative effort in the community.
Yeah.
And if you look at almonds in California,
Mhm.
they almond growers are responsible for creating a whole new product, almond milk. It's
Yeah.
amazing. It's been incredibly successful. And those trees come from the Himalayas. If they were in the Himalayas, similar to pecans, they wouldn't need extra water. They wouldn't need
Mhm.
irrigated, imported water. They wouldn't need imported bees.
Mhm.
Almonds are now the chief source of bee services.
Really?
Yes, and pecans don't need bees, and
Wait, why do they need bees?
they need bees to pollinate the trees because they're not in
Okay.
the Himalayas where the bees naturally would be pollinating the almonds.
So we're bringing in bees to California to pollinate these
So
almond
every
trees?
year, just about every available commercial bee is brought to California for the 12 weeks of the almond season.
Hmm. Wow.
And you're seeing a collapse of the bee community. I need to be careful because we haven't had a direct connection, but you wonder if all of that massive transportation, and these are also bees that are European bees, so they're
Yeah.
not native bees. If
Yeah.
that has something to do with the fact that that community, the bee community, is collapsing. So you're
Yeah.
gonna see more and more of those things, and you're gonna look at the natural ecosystem, realize that we don't know a fraction of what's going on in that
Mhm.
native ecosystem, and realize that we need to preserve it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. Before I started even learning more about this, I just assumed. Well, I knew that obviously almond trees and pistachios take a lot of water to produce. I think a lot of people are starting to become a lot more aware of that these days, which is a sensitive topic, especially now. Given we're recording this, during all the fires in California. Um, and it is so great to kind of have to distinguish between natively grown crops and
Mhm.
those not. I think you just kind of talked through that. It's really helpful for people to understand because it is so important because um, pecans are native to Texas, and like you're saying, they are. I don't know if they're drought resistant, but they've experienced the Texas climate for so many years that we don't have to have additional water to create those, right? And I think that's the big difference because people might think, well, I know a lot of nut trees and products get some criticism because they require a lot of water, but the big difference is what you're explaining, the difference between native and and trees that are not native to the area that require other natural resources that take a toll on the rest of the
Right, so
ecosystem. Um,
if Texas has very sporadic rain, right? And pecans have adapted to that over millions of years. So, in general, it's not always true, but in general, they can withstand huge spans of a drought
mhm,
and they'll produce less, but they won't die.
mhm,
So, you've got a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah.
to for margin. And
Mhm.
as I said, what we're not seeing is all the microbes that are living around this and the different other species that live with the pecans. All of that comes together.
Mhm.
And you can't see that in a poor almond tree that's struggling in California. If it runs out of water, it's dead.
Yeah.
You can't see that with pistachios. So it isn't a question of how much water they're using, it's where they are,
Yep.
where they belong, and how much water is being imported to address that. So if you talk about Georgia, they have plenty of water.
Yeah.
And so you don't have that need.
Yeah.
So it isn't a question of how much water they're using, it's the context.
That's it's what you're doing is just an incredible reminder of how fragile the ecosystems that we
Yes,
live in are.
very much so.
I want to get into starting PKN and more the business side. So early days, you have this idea, you decide to jump all in. What did that look like initially? Just like even formulating and getting the first samples done, building those relationships across kind of the industry. What were some of your bigger go to market challenges when you look back, kind of that first couple year period?
I just what I'm struck with is how lucky we are. We were very fortunate to end up working with probably the world's best formulator for plant-based milks,
Oh, cool.
Jim Gratzik, as he was starting a food innovation lab at the University of Georgia.
Mm.
He was the CTO of a company that made the oat and almond milks for Starbucks, for Oatly.
Oh, wow.
So he really understands how you make an oat milk,
Hmm.
and he's a Georgian,
Hmm.
and he spent a summer basically chopping up pecans and looking at stone grounding and how you do different kinds of roasting protocols. So that was really formative. We've been very lucky in the CPG community through Naturally Austin
Mm.
to get a breadth of support from manufacturing consultants like Whole Brain Consulting, legal support. So we had a lot of sort of, friends in shepherding.
Hmm.
It is an industry that where little brands, I think, are the thing that draws you to places like Target, right? You want to go pick up this new product,
Hmm.
but at the same time, it's an industry dominated by massive retailers, by
Hmm.
massive distributors, by massive manufacturers. So you're sort of
Yeah.
always trying to basically get out of the way
Yeah.
and get what you need and then get out.
Right.
You talk about my startup background. One of the things I learned very early on was that the best way to run out of business if you've got a good idea is running out of cash.
Yep.
So we are as tight as we can possibly be. And everyone on the team understands that we need to be as tight as possible.
Yep.
So my background in startups has been very valuable. One, because I'm aware of the cash issue.
Hmm.
Two, I understand how important I think supporters and partners can be. But
Hmm.
then three, you do look at you get these hits that are completely undeserved.
Yeah.
And you need to wake up in the morning and have a sense of humor and say, well, that happened now.
Yeah.
Won't be doing that one again.
Yeah.
And there have been a lot of things that we've learned along the way, that's for sure.
Yeah. Any particular hits you've taken, in the past, say, 6 months that you've had to overcome?
I Yeah, we had a retailer, accidentally, remove us from their system. So
Mm.
we've, been sort of selling things without being in their database, which
Oh,
has
man.
been a real nightmare. We still have a situation with one of with the largest distributor for natural foods in the United States, where for some reason we can't receive their purchase orders,
Hmm.
which, in case you're wondering, is a very important thing.
Yeah, and that seems like a big
So
one.
we've had those things
Yeah.
happen. We haven't had supply issues. We've had very good suppliers.
Mhm.
We've been very fortunate with very high quality manufacturing.
Yeah.
This is a very big deal. This last unrefrigerated for a year and a half.
Oh, wow.
That has been, from a startup perspective, so important.
Just having a long shelf life.
Long shelf life that you don't need to refrigerate,
Mhm.
that is a safe product. So one of the things you do is you set up your small business is you say, "What are your goals?"
Mhm.
You start off with "do no harm," right?
Yeah.
And with food, It's very dicey sometimes. There is a seal on this. As long as it isn't broken, this stuff is safe,
Yeah.
and that's a very, very big deal.
Yeah.
So we've been very fortunate
I'm
that
gonna
way.
look at the packaging here. Um, because obviously a lot of things are labeled like organic and, there's some messaging of like sustainability,
We've got these guys
and you've got
here,
all that.
my little bees. Yes.
Is there a
Oh, yeah.
is there a way in the industry to identify products as like sustainably grown or made, you know what I mean? Or like the fact that you guys again, I'm trying to distinguish between like oat milk or almond milk and
Mhm,
pecan milk and that you have kind of a native approach to it with a
mhm.
with a crop that's grown natively where it's made. How do you how do you message that onto a package? Like how do you make that easy for consumers to like understand this is a better option for the ecosystem that you live in, right? And for your community. Like how do you message that? Is that a
That is
challenge
that
or
is the I would say that might be the biggest challenge.
yeah.
So yesterday off of TikTok, we had a question saying, "How dare you use so much water? You're just as bad as the almonds." And technically, an almond tree and a pecan tree use about the same amount of water.
Mhm.
So the discussion we just had, unpacking that,
Yeah,
but you've got a sentence, 2 sentences to say it.
yeah,
So I say native or indigenous, and people go, "What? What does that mean?" So it's a very difficult thing to do, and
yeah.
as a little company, we're not Coca-Cola. We don't have millions of dollars to spend on this. It's a very important message,
Mhm.
and CPG gives us much more attention than I had when I was doing this as a water person.
Yeah, that's
But
interesting.
still, it's a really difficult thing. Now,
Yeah.
what you're going to find, I think, is that it's the Texan pride that carries the day. So
Mhm.
this stuff tastes great.
Yeah.
It's very good for you. This is a very important factor in terms of brain health.
Mhm.
Pecans have the highest level of flavonoids of any tree nut, highest ratio of antioxidants of any tree nut.
Wow.
So it's a very nutritious, delicious nut, but you need that irresistible Texas pride
Yeah.
to make the whole thing work, I think.
Yeah. I mean, when I was part of a beer company that was, trying to appeal to a Texas audience, and you definitely it can't be, overrated how much Texans wanna have, made in Texas right on the packaging and how they wanna have that connection to it being
I
a
know.
Texas-born brand, and so, yeah, I think that will definitely, bode well for you guys having that relationship with
It
Texas, and I'm sure
serves
it already
us
has.
it serves us
Um,
very well. People are Texas pecans, of course I love pecans.
yeah.
There's also a very judgmental, perspective on, "You better do this right. If
Mhm.
you're gonna use pecans, you better bring it."
Yeah,
So there's a responsibility, not to just have this be smushed up pecans put in water,
yeah,
but really, what do you do to honor what my grandmother puts in her Thanksgiving pies? You
yeah,
better not mess this up.
right. Yeah, I totally get that. So when thinking about, like, how you constructed the company and how you wanted to operate things, you had a lot of experience not only advising startups and seeing how companies were kind of created and, but also on the water side, you did a lot of work connecting the VCs to, the
Yeah,
people, to these big companies and how to fund some of these really expensive water technology solutions, and it seemed like you did a really great job of just connecting the dots and figuring out how to finance everything, which can be part of one of the harder parts of a puzzle of
yeah,
starting a
absolutely, yeah.
company. How did you want to create your puzzle? Like, did you take any money initially from VCs? Did you want to be bootstrapped mainly to start? What does that looked like for you?
So it would have been great to raise $5 million at the beginning. It would have made my life less stressful. But nobody got this at the time. And like I said, there was that moment where I said, I'm losing my patience.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it. What we're
So you did try to raise some money to create this idea and maybe not even run it necessarily. Were you trying to kind of say, "Hey, we should raise money. Somebody should then lead this." Is that
right.
kind of what you're doing?
And I still think this is, if you haven't tasted it, but it tastes amazing. It's a good product.
Yeah, I
It
will
makes
taste it after the show because I love my non-dairy alternatives. So,
it makes a lot of sense. I spent 4 years asking people, "Explain to me why this is a lousy idea so I can go home." No one would tell me.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm stuck with is that what I see is what they would refer to as a vertical integration ingredient play. What I see is that pecans are I love food. And in 20 years, they're gonna tell me that, these things are off the plate because they're not sustainable, they use too much water, they're too expensive, they come from a long way off.
Mhm.
They're gonna get off my plate. You want something that tastes truly amazing. You want something that's fun and brings back wonderful nostalgic memories. So this is one of those things.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, what you really need to worry about is the supply of pecans. You mentioned extreme weather events. We've talked about the water scarcity issues, stealing or taking water from farmers and bringing it into the municipalities and basically destroying a lot of the resource for the
Yeah.
long term. So you start to worry about all these things. So there's an
Mhm.
ingredient play, which is going to need to rest on the idea that people get as emotionally attached to their pecans as
Mhm.
the Texans are.
Yeah.
So that's the reason to move to Texas and to start here. But what I see is that I'd like to see farmland investors invest in this company,
Mhm.
ingredients uh, processors invest in this company. And I think we would like to see CPG investors. We have advisors from the CPG world, and we'll be
Mhm.
bringing them on as we raise money. But I think the idea is that the true power of this company, in contrast to what you see with almonds or pistachios or walnuts, is going to be the value of that brand in bringing forward what is an enormous farmland play.
Yeah.
So the smartest, longest term investors, for example, the Mormon Church or the Prudential Group, they're investing right now in pecans.
To the Mormon Church?
The Mormon Church, I'm not sure if we're like, yeah, so yeah,
They have
they're one of
a lot
my
of farmland.
heroes on this. The Mormons tend to think very, very far ahead,
Okay.
and their investment fund for the church itself is one of the most sort of I think one of the most long-seeing, successful, uh, of these what they call green evergreen funds.
Okay, cool.
And so you look at the university endowments and how they focus around natural resources.
Mhm.
This is the kind of thing that would go into, yeah, I guess the Texas University's endowment,
Mm.
where they look at this as something that
Yeah.
will really pay back huge dividends over long term.
Right. Interesting. Um,
So if you look at water scarcity today, you say, I'm not really sure if it's going to be a big deal.
yeah.
If I tell you 50 years from now, it's definitely going to be a big deal, right?
Yep.
So if you're investing for 50 years from now, 100 years from now, water scarcity is a relevant theme around which you need to invest.
Yeah. Yeah, water's probably not the only issue that we have a hard time as a country, like, having a long-term, thought strategy around, right? I think it's so many industries are so short-sighted and they need to hit certain revenue goals this year, right? And
It's
making
true.
investments up front to do something 10 years down the road is something I think, um, we've just struggled with across the board. But I think water is one of the probably the biggest one to start thinking that way. And
It's
so,
true.
um, and you mentioned kind of your relationship with farmland investors and how crucial that will be. Because I imagine if you guys do, if Texans continue to promote this and love this, and it grows and it becomes the next Oatly or whatever, you'll need more pecan trees, right? And you'll need more farmland.
Mhm.
Um, would you? Where else would you need to? Could you grow? Like, where else makes sense to kind of continue expanding pecan tree growth?
I think there's a pretty natural progression just outward from Texas.
Hmm.
One of my passions is around Oklahoma,
Okay.
where there are a lot of natives.
Mm.
So trees that aren't cultivated, that grow naturally,
Hmm.
sort of large spans of untended native pecans. Those are going to have much more of a gamey, buttery
Mm.
taste. So
A lot of different varieties of pecans. Okay.
right, and so that'll be a really exciting moment.
Yeah.
And as I said, one of our dreams is to have basically a batch of this produced that says Mississippi. or
Mm.
Arkansas.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
These are Arkansas pecans, and
Yeah.
Texans swear their pecans taste great. Wouldn't you like to have a competition?
Both side by side,
Right, so
PKN tasting.
that's where I guess that's
Yeah.
where I go with the expansion. There are a lot of fun things we can do. The critical thing is to get over that hump of people walking into a store and asking for it.
Yeah.
So on TikTok, on Instagram, in Facebook, we're fighting that battle of just getting above the noise.
Mhm.
And as I said, I can't imagine a better place to do that than Texas.
Yeah. Yeah. Is Texas on the packaging anywhere, or are you allowed
Uh,
to do that?
that's it used to be right here,
Yeah.
and we're very popular in places like California. And
Gotcha.
our famous CPG advisor said, "Well, of course, you're gonna remove that now."
Yeah.
But I think it's somewhere on the label. We are a Go Texan company,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
we're very
nice.
proudly Texan.
Mhm.
And yeah, so Texas is a polarizing element sometimes. Now, if you say
Totally.
Americana and you say sort of a lot of the Texas values,
Yeah.
that's something that I think Americans can get their heads around.
Yeah. For sure. What's your favorite way to do you put it in your coffee, or how do you like to enjoy
So I
PKN?
didn't bring it in. I'll bring it to you afterward. There's something called Zero, which is just pecans, vanilla, and salt. So
Okay.
no gums, no added sugar.
Yeah.
Very difficult to make, as good as we've made it.
Mhm.
That's my choice when I'm mixing with coffee.
Yeah.
This produces wonderful foam.
Oh, cool.
So if you're feeling like you wake up in the morning and you're having a bad day already, this is my go-to on sort of the days where I feel like I need to spoil myself.
Nice.
The creamers are also just a wonderful, just throw it in your coffee,
Mhm.
throw it in your White Russian,
Nice.
throw it
Oh,
we call it a brown Russian. Uh, so throw it in your alcohol, throw it in your coffee.
yeah.
And then in terms of smoothies, the original is this great base with a little hint of pecan flavor, so it makes it sort of more special than your almond milk.
Okay, very
But
cool.
a really nice, clean label, non-dairy
Yeah.
that supports the future of farming in the United States.
Yeah, I love that. Amazing. Well, I don't think I have anything else for you, Laura. This has
That's
been so
great.
fascinating. I've loved just hearing your whole story because I think it's such a great example of how you've been able to not only chase something very, mission driven, but then redirect and figure out how to pivot your career to still make a difference, but also, create a really cool business out of it. And so I think Pecan is kind of the output of that. And so thank you for sharing your whole story here.
Thank
And I
you.
appreciate being on.
Well, and you've asked some really great questions. Thank you so much.
Of course.
So for those of you in Austin wondering where can I try this stuff, you're in luck. They're in Central Market and expanding quickly. I have a feeling you'll be seeing a lot more PKN and that this will be an incredible case study of a CPG brand built around sustainability. Laura said something that I fully agree with, that brands that exist 50 years from now will have to be built around sustainability. It won't be an option or a marketing tactic. It will be a necessity. Until next time, I'm Pat Kaloran, and you're listening to Lone Startup.